Hello, and welcome to the Book Club Review, the podcast about book clubs and the books that get people talking. Before the internet, you may remember people used to send letters to friends in the post. Well, book blogger and podcaster Simon Thomas came up with the wonderfully romantic idea of posting a book with attached notepad for comments from friend to friend around the world, eventually receiving back the book with thoughts from every reader along the way. In times of COVID lockdown, could this be the perfect form of book club? Of course, we were eager to hear more.
I started doing it in 2004, and the idea was you'd pick one book that you thought would be interesting to a group of people. You only had one person you were posting it on to. Each month, you posted on the next book, always to the same persons. By the end of, say, a year, however many people were in the group, you get your original book back with a notebook full of comments. So it's like a very, very slow book group. You're waiting a whole year to find out what people think about your book choices, which when you're going a bit more avant-garde or a bit outside the box, means you're on tenterhooks for a whole year waiting to see what you'll get. But it's also really fun. Each month's like a little surprise. What will I get through the post?
And then does it have to go round again so that everyone can read the comments?
Well, what we did is you'd reuse the same notebook for the next book. So they could catch up on the comments from the last book while they were writing in the comments for the next book.
I love the idea of this. And then that book, who gets to keep the book? I suppose the person who starts it.
Yeah, it goes back. We did have a few mishaps because this was going to America and Germany and Spain. It was going all over the place, and the postal system, we're all very grateful for our postal workers this year more than ever, but it's not perfect. And sometimes just a book would arrive or nothing would arrive, and you think all those comments somewhere. But generally, yes, you get it back. You get to keep the notebook eventually. So I've got one notebook that has 3 different books in that I sent round. I think later I just used one of those very slim sort of moleskin notebooks that only had enough for one book, because we realised after the first year that the key to making everyone's life a bit easier was sending the thinnest, lightest books that you could find and notebooks. Because the first year we got a few chunksters, and at the end, I'm saying I enjoyed reading it, but I could have bought several copies for the price it took me to post this to Spain. Yeah.
I just sent Laura a package to Canada, and of course, me being me, I put in some books for her baby daughter Rose, and I put in a couple of books for her and one for her mum, and then I put some clothes and the thing I actually had to send, which was a microphone. And I took it down to the post office and they weighed it. And they were like, you do realise this is over 2 kilograms? I was like, yes. How much will that be? And they were like, it'll be £76.
Oh my goodness. Yeah,
so I had to come back. And then it was awful trying to choose, because I could only send one book and one little thing for her parents and one little thing of clothes. But so, yes, when it comes to the one book that you're choosing to send around the world, what do you think? I mean, what were your ones that you did?
The first one I sent was a book called Once a Week by A.A. Milne. Everyone will know A.A. Milne for writing Winnie the Pooh, but he was also a very eclectic writer in many different fields. And before he wrote children's books, he was an essayist for Punch, and it's sort of short comic sketches and things. So I sent that round because I thought that's just a bit of fun. It did get generally positive feedback, but I think it was just fun. So I thought I'm going to try something a bit more difficult. And then I sent A House in Its Head by Ivy Compton Burnet. Have you read any Ivy Compton Burnet? No. I don't know if I spoke about her last time I was on it, because I'm quite an evangelist for her, but she wrote between 1920 maybe and 1950, approximately like that, but all her books are set in the late Victorian period, in these sprawling families where everyone speaks in an extremely stylized way. Servants or head of the house, they're all quoting Spenser to each other or arguing for hours over a point of grammar. I think they're hilarious. Very much a Marmite book. I'd say maybe 1/3 of people love her and 2/3 hate her. So I thought this will see which side people are on. And as I predicted, that was about the ratio that came back. But I always think if you've got any converts to Ivy, they're a convert for life. And it's worth making everyone else feel miserable for a month with it.
And if you were going to read one, which one would you read?
Well, that's the great thing about her, is that they're all basically exactly the same. My favourite is More Women Than Men, which is actually being republished in 2021. Until that comes out, none of her books are in print in the UK. So yeah, it would be great to have that one. And they're also doing, I think, A House in Its Head. But yeah, you can't really go wrong. But also it saves you a lot of time, because if you don't like one, you won't like any of them. It's not like you have to keep hunting to find the one that you'll love.
Well, I just think that's such a lovely idea for a book club, and very much an antidote to, our sort of increasingly digital age.
Yeah, what was quite fun about it is that the people I did it with were part of an online book group I was in. Well, not really a book group, it was more like a Yahoo group where we just discussed whatever we were reading. So we didn't have set books we were all reading. So it was this paradox or contrast or something of this group where we were all talking about immediately whichever book we were reading by email, and also waiting several months to see what they thought of a different book I was reading or had just read. And it introduced me to some books that I've loved ever since. I mean, a lot of books I haven't loved, but I was one of the very early, in my head, adopters of Shirley Jackson in this country. So before, I mean, obviously she was very well known in America.
Yeah, even I've read Shirley Jackson now.
Yeah. But before anything of hers was in print in the UK, or back in print in the UK, a lady called Lisa sent round We've Always Lived in the Castle, and I loved it and spent far too much money shipping her other books over from America. But that was wonderful, an author I'd never heard of, and now obviously everyone loves, quite rightly.
And my great discovery this year, was it you that told me about it? Was a non-fiction, well, it's a memoir, isn't it? Life Among the Savages, which is her memoir of family life.
Yeah. Which I love, and there's a sequel, Raising Demons, also great.
So great, and I haven't read Raising Demons yet, but I love that book so much, and I've bought it and given it to several people as well. I think it's a great one to pass on, but it's just so unexpected because the horror books, they do have a warmth to them, don't they? I think that's the thing about her. It's dark, but there is also this sort of warmth and magic to it.
It's sort of gothic more than horror, isn't it?
Yeah. And then this family life is almost like the flip side, where you get all the warmth and the comedy and the humour, and yet underneath there's this little undercurrent, something a bit troubling, and you're not quite sure what's going on.
And I think when you discover, as I read, is it Ruth Franklin's biography of her, when discovering that she was severely agoraphobic, and you can see that playing out in both those sort of genres. Like, you've got the very funny, gentle family life, but also that feeling that they are all trapped in that house. And it's much more clear in We've Always Lived in the Castle or The Sundial or The Haunting of Hill House.
Which I must read. And I just think it's such a natural fit as well, because there is something a bit creepy about small children. You know, sometimes, like sort of late at night, you know, you might be pottering around in the kitchen, and if they get up for whatever reason, one of them will appear sort of standing at the top of the stairs, and you're just like, ah! You know?
What's happening? Yes, I don't have children, but I find the same with a cat. So, you know.
They just appear and they stand and they stare at you silently, and it's just...
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and I think that's her amazing skill, is that she can take those basic things about family life and turn it either to scare or to amuse. But yeah, just wonderful. And
I loved another image from that book, which she opens with, which is the idea that she and her husband have fallen down a well, and they decided to make a life for themselves at the bottom of this well with the books and the children. And I just thought that, for me, really kind of encapsulated the feeling of this COVID year in a way.
Okay,
it felt like we fell down a well, and then we sort of got used to being there, and we made new lives for ourselves, and it's kind of hard to imagine actually climbing out, because, you know, I don't know about you, but for me it's quite nice now at the bottom of my well, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly I've read more than ever this year, but I live on my own, so what I've mostly missed is just touching anybody else. Like I'm in a bubble with my twin brother who lives about an hour away from me, so I've had a few hugs this year, but I'm not the most tactile person, but you just suddenly realise I've not touched another human for 2 months. That's very strange. But, yeah. So I'm looking forward to coming out the well, but it does have its benefits at the same time.
And you have another interesting role working with the British Library. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about the books that you've been working on with them?
I'd love to. So yeah, the British Library Women Writers series started in March, which wasn't the best time for books to come out when all the bookshops closed, but it's going forward anyway, into next year and beyond, hopefully. They got in touch with me because of my blog and the fact that I often write about women writers from the early 20th century who are lesser known. They'd done so well with their series of crime classics that they were looking for other areas to do similar things, and they've done a range of little-known sci-fi books as well, and they wanted to do these women writers. The original scope was 1910s to 50s. It's now expanding a little bit, but with the idea that they'd reprint books by women, about women, that had something to say about women's lives in that period. They had a couple they'd already chosen before I came on board, but since then I've been able to suggest books I really love, and it's been so exciting to write the afterwords for them and see them come in to print. The first couple that were my choices were Chatterton Square by E.H. Young, and I had great fun writing all about 1930s divorce law, because it's basically about unhappy marriages in a square in Bristol. And Dangerous Ages by Rose Macaulay was the other of the first batch that I chose. That is a really wonderful, from the 1920s, that looks at 4 generations of women in the same family. And yeah, it's really my dream come true. In my head, I always wanted to start a reprint publisher at some point, but I don't have any capital or any business sense or anything like that. So it's great where I can be in a place where I just say, I love this book, you should reprint it. And obviously they have to love it too, and they've turned down a few that I've suggested. But if they like it and they can get the rights and everything, then a few months later, I get to see it back in print. And it's much easier to press on people if you can say it's available in your nearest bookshop, rather than saying you'd love this book, but you have to go and try and track down some obscure secondhand copy online.
And you're consistently drawn, aren't you, to books from the past? I know, listening to your podcast, I know you do read quite a lot of contemporary things as well. I mean, you just read so much. But you do have this real interest in delving into the past. What is it about you that draws you back there?
It's a really good question, and I don't really know the answer, except for it was what my taste started to be when I started reading books for grown-ups when I was 16 or whatever, when I moved on from Sweet Valley High.
I love that you read those.
I went back to one a while ago. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I ever read these. They're so dreadful. But at the time, I mean, as long as I loved reading, that was the main thing, I guess, in my parents' eyes.
Yeah.
So. And yeah, one of the earliest books that I really loved as an adult was Diary of a Provincial Lady by E.M. Delafield, which was published in 1930. And on the face of it, how old was I? 16, 17, 18-year-old boy doesn't have a lot in common with a housewife and mother from 1930. But there was something about that world that just really captivated me. And I think it was a really interesting time for increasing publishing. The change of publishing and printing made it much easier to print books and much easier to talk about the new middle classes. There's a whole spurt of books about ordinary people, I guess, in a way that hadn't quite been before. And obviously it was still very much hidebound by class and race, so it was very far from being a period where everyone was being represented in publishing, but maybe more than had previously been. And there's just something about that period between the wars where maybe it's a bit like Shirley Jackson, it's that everyone was quite light-hearted on the surface, but there was that undercurrent of mourning the last war and being aware there might be another one on the horizon. And I find that mix really interesting, which comes out to a lesser or greater extent in different books of the period. And as you say, I do read more contemporary things that got sort of a black hole between the 70s and the 90s, maybe, where I don't really read anything from there. That whenever I want to feel most myself as a reader, I seem to be drawn to about 1925 in a mansion in the Dorsetshire countryside or something, which, I wish.
And I suppose also, is there perhaps the element of the kind of thrill of discovery? These are not books that everyone is reading. These are not books that everyone is talking about. And so I imagine when you come across a good one.
True, there's nothing that's as exciting as finding a book that no one knows about and discovering it's wonderful. Particularly, when I can then say to the British Library, you should publish this. I just read, and I'm hoping they'll do it. I haven't heard back from them. Sally on the Rocks by Winifred Boggs, which is a dreadful name, but a wonderful book, which is from 1916. I think it was sometime during the First World War. And Sally goes back to the village she grew up in. She's been living in Paris, but there's the worry of the encroaching German army, because an old lady in the village tells her that the curate might be looking for a wife, so she goes back to try and see if she can get some money from him and be his wife without any illusions that she might fall in love with him. She just needs security at that point. But it's this wonderfully feminist book in many ways, because there's lots of bits where she talks about the different sexual moralities facing men and women, how the fact that she's slept with someone before she got engaged rules her out from everyone, whereas for her partner it doesn't. Also, she gets in this love triangle with a local widow who also wants to marry the curate, but they're very frank with each other. They just say, we're going to fight as hard as we can. Neither of us have any respect for him, but we both recognise that he's got some money, and may the best sister win. So it's just wonderful to see that sort of attitude in the 1910s, which I would find quite modern in a recent novel. It's quite a hard book to find. I'm hoping maybe at some point it won't be, if the British Library accept my suggestion.
Does the curate have any idea what's going on, or is he just sort of blithely oblivious?
Oh no, he's an idiot. There's this wonderful long scene where Sally takes them off into the woods for a walk and deliberately gets them lost, because she thinks if we're lost under the moonlight, then presumably he'll get infatuated and propose. Doesn't quite work out, but he has no idea that she's planning anything. He's a moron. But, but yeah, you've got no sympathies with him at all as a reader.
And where are you up to with your Book of the Year Club, as we named it? Explain a little bit about what that is, just for anyone who didn't hear that original interview.
Absolutely. So every 6 months, my friend Karen, who blogs at Cagsy's Bookish Ramblings, and I pick a year, usually in the first half of the 20th century, although we have gone as far as the 70s, and encourage everyone who wants to read a book published in that year. And we all put our reviews online, and together we try and draw together a picture of what that year looked like in publishing. The most recent one we did was 1956. And then in April, we're doing 1936 Club. There have been people who suggested we should be going more into the 80s and 90s, but we retreated to the 30s because Karen has similar tastes to me. So yeah, I've not planned what I'm reading yet, but 1936 felt like a nice, safe place for me. So the last one, 56, is on the cusp of where I feel comfortable, but one that stood out was Tea at 4 o'clock by Janet McNeill, which is a woman who has always been oppressed by her parents and her sister and not really given any freedom. And it starts with her sister's funeral, and she's just starting out to have some sort of independence, but then her mysterious wayward brother returns. That was great fun. Well, I say fun, it was also really sad. It was republished by Virago in the 80s, but I don't see a lot of people talking about it, and it is, really wonderful to have that prompt to go back and look at that sort of book.
That sounds great. Well, I'll put all the details in the show notes. And Simon, as ever, total delight to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming.
So fun to be here. Thank you.
That's nearly it for this episode. Here's a quick recap of the books mentioned, which were Once a Week by A. Milne, A House in Its Head by Ivy Compton Burnet, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, The Haunting of Hill House, Life Among the Savages, and Raising Demons by Shirley Jackson, the British Library Women Writers series, including Chatterton Square by E.H. Young and Dangerous Ages by Rose Macaulay, and Tea at 4 O'Clock by Janet McNeill. If after all that you want even more book recommendations, then keep listening for a little extra bit at the end where Simon talks about his most anticipated book of 2021, The Stone of Chastity by Margery Sharp, first published, of course, in 1940. And all those titles will be listed in the show notes and on our website. If you want to hear more from Simon, listen to his Tea or Books podcast, available on your podcast player of choice, or find him online at stuckinabook.com. If you're curious about his Book of the Year club, or maybe want to join in, have a listen to episode 39 from our archive. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with our next book club show, where we're discussing Writers and Lovers by Lily King and Early Work by Andrew Martin. Both novels feature young, aspiring writers with storylines that weave together the creative process, romantic relationships and life choices. One of them we loved, and one of them got thrown across the room at 70 pages in. Which one was it? And what did Laura's book club think? Listen in to find out. If you enjoyed this show and want to listen to more, you'll find our archive of over 80 episodes at thebookclubreview.co.uk, from blockbusting bestseller Where the Crawdads Sing to life-changing non-fiction titles like Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. You can also explore our ever-growing library of book reviews and articles, all designed to help you figure out your next read. If you'd like to see what we're up to between episodes, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at BookClubRVWPod, or email thebookclubreview@gmail.com. And if you're not already, why not subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts? If you like what we do, please take a moment to rate and review the show, as this helps us to reach new listeners. And if you have a bookish friend who might like the show, please do send them the link. But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading. Over to Simon.
One of my favourite authors is Margery Sharp, who is wonderful at comedy and also wonderful at more poignant books. And Dean Street Press, under their furrowed Middlebrow imprint, are republishing many of her hard-to-find novels in January 2021. There's lots that I've had my eye on for years, but I'm not willing to spend hundreds of pounds on them, and now I'll be able to get them. So The Stone of Chastity is the one that I'm really excited about, which is about a professor going to a village where there is rumoured to be a stone in a stream that will trip up unchaste women. He looks at it very academically and doesn't understand why his experiments in the village are causing offence to everyone. So yeah, glad Margery Sharp is getting her moment in the sun again.
That sounds great. I've never heard of her. Of course.
She's wonderful.